Part 34. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 332. Officials from the Ministry of Rites came to the Yamen to pay their respects early in the morning. As soon as they returned to their duty rooms, they heard jaw-dropping news. Chen Zheng, a doctor in the Ministry of Rites, was dismissed from his post due to his involvement in an imperial examination fraud case a few years ago and was thrown into the Dali Temple jail. There are also several minor officials involved in the case in the Ministry of Rites. They will be yoked for 3 months and given 100 sticks, and then sent to the army in a smoky place. Once they go, they will never come back. Compared with the other departments of the 6 departments, the risk of the Ministry of Rites is much smaller. It is nothing more than messing up the etiquette process and being fined or demoted. But in the Ministry of Rites, there is one thing that cannot be touched. That is imperial examination fraud. The imperial examination is an important way for the imperial court to select officials. The Ministry of Rites has always been responsible for it. The crime of fraud is even worse than murder and arson. People who participate in fraud have always had extremely miserable consequences. Dr. Chen was sent to the Dali Temple prison for fraud, and his life was over. The officials in the Ministry of Rites were shocked and sighed, but they also became extremely vigilant. In the study room, Lu Feng looked at Tang Huai and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Chen was investigated this time, and it was because of King Kang's connection. I don't know how King Kong got hold of Mr. Lu, but he launched an attack at this time. He clearly wanted to. The Lord is embarrassed. Chen is the wedding messenger designated by the Ministry of Rites. Now that he is in the Tianlao of Dali Temple, he cannot be the wedding messenger. The candidate for the wedding messenger has been changed twice. If anything goes wrong this time, His Majesty will definitely be in trouble. If there is even greater dissatisfaction, then the entire Ministry of Rites will probably be punished." Lu Feng looked at Tang Huai, thought for a while, and said, "Master Tang, King Kong must have come here to send a wedding envoy. He is afraid that if we appoint another person, he will fall into King Kang's hands again. Your Majesty can't explain it at all." Tang Huai looked calm, tapped the table with his index finger, and said, "Now the only people from the Rites Department who can serve as wedding messengers are you, the doctor from the Shanbu Department, and the doctor from the Temple Department. The Dining Department." Lu Feng thought for a while and said, "Sir, I'm afraid the Dining Department is not good. Prince Kong can dig out the clues about Chen Zheng 4 years ago. If the problem of the Dining Department is found, and it is changed again, Your Majesty will definitely surrender. Ministry of Sin and Rites. You don't have to be the wedding messenger, and we can't let you take this risk." Tang Huai thought for a while and said, "In this case, only Mr. Lu from the temple will be chosen." Lu Feng thought for a while, nodded and said, "There is nothing wrong with Mr. Lu. If King Kong forcibly obstructs it, His Majesty will probably notice something." Tang Huai looked at Lu Feng, the Minister of Rites, and said, "Let him know first, just in case, don't report it for the time being." Lu Feng nodded and said, "I'll go right away." After leaving the Yamen, Lu Jin, the doctor of the Temple Department, walked out of the Yamen of the Ministry of Rites, with a confused expression on his face. The errand of the wedding messenger went around in a circle, and it actually fell on his head. It was a bit incredible no matter how you thought about it. This is a great achievement. He should be happy that this kind of credit falls on him. But for some reason, he wasn't happy at all. First, the host and guest doctor suddenly fell ill, and then the doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette was caught cheating. Whoever was responsible for the wedding was unlucky. He was still a little worried in his heart, and he felt that something was not right for some reason. But after thinking about it, I didn't realize what was wrong. I could only shake my head and murmured, "It should be just a coincidence." When he returned home, a maid came forward to report that Yang Langzhon from the Ministry of Punishment was visiting. He and Dr. Yang of the Ministry of Justice were Jinchi in the same year, and they have been close friends for many years. They move around a lot on weekdays. After hearing this, the gloom in his heart was slightly lifted, and he opened the door and walked into the study. In the study, his collection of fine wine had long been opened, and someone was sitting in his seat, sipping. Lu Jin looked at the man and said, "You have only been injured for a few days. Can you drink?" The man waved his hand and said, "It doesn't matter if you have a few drinks." Lu Jin sat opposite the man and asked, "I just don't understand. You spent 3 months at home to recover from your serious injury. On your first day at the Ministry of Punishment, you fell into a well again. Do you want to ask a fortune teller to tell you whether you are destined to be too old or not? It's not that you're destined to be too old, but it's true that you're destined to be a broom star." Zhang Langzhong of the Ministry of Punishment waved his hand and said, "I burned my feet on purpose, and I jumped into the well myself. If I hadn't done this, I wouldn't be here now. Opportunity to sit here and drink with you." Lu Jin waved his hands with disdain and said, "Then Tang Ning is so powerful, how can she cause harm wherever she goes?" Zhang Langzhong took a sip of his wine and said, "Didn't he join your Ministry of Etiquette? You'll find out later." Lu Jin didn't take it seriously and said, "Our Ministry of Rights is not like your Ministry of Punishments. Even if a broom star enters our Ministry of Rights, he must behave." Before he finished his sentence, as if he thought of something, the expression on his face suddenly froze and he murmured, "The broom star." Zhang Langzhong saw the strange expression on his face and asked, "What's wrong?" Lu Jin moved his lips and said, "Although he did nothing in the Ministry of Rights, in the 2 days since he arrived, the host and guest doctor suddenly fell ill, and the doctor of the Ministry of Rights was arrested for fraud. This should be related to him. It doesn't matter, right?" "That's not necessarily true." Zhang Langzhong looked at him and said, "Nothing has happened to the 4 doctors in the Ministry of Rights for so many years. Why did he lose half of his value in 2 days when he came? I tell you, you have to be careful. Mr. Tang has a deep hatred for you, Lord Shangzhu. He may have come to your Ministry of Rights for revenge." "No way." Lu Jin murmured, but the expression on his face was already a little frightened. That man took the initiative to choose to go to the Ministry of Rights, which was beyond everyone's expectations, but the entire Ministry of Rights was united and ignored him. He didn't do anything in the past 2 days. Once was an accident, twice was a coincidence. If there was a third time, even if he didn't believe it, he would have to be more careful. But the problem is, it was the wedding messenger who got into trouble twice. If there really was a third time, wouldn't he be the unlucky one? He forced himself to calm down, shook his head, and said, "It's impossible, it's impossible, it doesn't make sense." Zhang Langzhong looked at him and asked, "Do you think he is reasonable with the Minister of Hubu and the Minister of Punishment? Or do you think you are smarter than them?" Lu Jin pursed his lips, looked at Zhang Langzhong, and said, "Old Zhang, you have been in the Ministry of Justice for a long time and have seen a lot. Please help me analyze it. If it is really him, what is his purpose?" He told the doctor of the Ministry of Punishment in detail what happened in the past 2 days. Zhang Langzhong thought for a while and said, "So, whoever in your etiquette department serves as the wedding messenger will be unlucky. Think about it, if the etiquette department messes up the princess's wedding ceremony, who will be the most unlucky?" Lu Jin thought for a while and suddenly said, "Master Shangzhu. Isn't it clear?" Zhang Langzhong slapped his thigh and said, "He didn't go to the etiquette department earlier or later, but he went to the etiquette department at this time. He just made trouble for your etiquette department. First, he changed 2 wedding messengers in a row. Let Tang Shangzhu make fools of himself again and again in His Majesty's presence. I'm afraid that even if you become the wedding messenger, he will cause trouble. This marriage is very important. Once something is messed up, you will be waiting to pack up and go back. Go home, when the time comes, even your Lord Chancellor will be blamed. Lu Jin's face turned pale and he asked, but Lord Shangshu has decided to let me be the wedding messenger, and I have already agreed. What should I do? So what if you agree? Zhang Langzhong looked at him and said calmly, the water in the capital is deep. As officials, if we want to gain a foothold here, we should be tougher on ourselves. One of the hosts and guests fell ill, a doctor from the Ministry of Etiquette was arrested, and another doctor from the temple department came. Although it was a bit endless, compared to the others, the doctor from the temple department was sitting opposite him, making it easier to start. Tang Ning had just sat down in her seat, and before she could decide which method to use, she heard the news that Lu Jin, the doctor of the ancestral temple department, was seriously injured by a speeding carriage on the way to the ceremony department in the morning. The carriage hit and escaped, and she was shocked. The buns in his hands fell to the ground. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 333. There seemed to be something wrong with the feng shui of the Ministry of Etiquette. Tang Ning could swear to God that the carriage that hit and escaped the doctor of the ancestral ministry was definitely not hired by him. He wasn't in a hurry to do that yet. He picked up the bun on the ground, walked out of the door, and threw it away with a look of regret. Although the stuffing of the buns was a bit salty, it was still Xiaoxio's first time learning to make it, so he was a little reluctant to just throw it away. When I was walking back, I passed by a check-in room somewhere. When I walked to the window, I heard someone whispering. Have you heard that Dr. Lu was hit by a carriage when he went out this morning? I've heard it before. It's only been 3 days and 3 of the 4 doctors have had troubles. It's so damn evil. Have you noticed that the 3 adults all got into trouble after they became wedding messengers? Whoever falls on this errand will be unlucky. They are not wedding messengers, they are simply fate messengers. Don't always keep an eye on the wedding messenger. Think about it, Mr. Tang has been in the ceremony department for 3 days, and something happened to one of the doctors every day. It seems that the rumors outside are not false at all. Both the Ministry of Husbandry and the Ministry of Punishment killed ministers. Minister Lu is fine. I'm afraid it wasn't the 3 ministers who blocked the disaster for him. Cough, Tang Ning coughed heavily outside the window, and immediately there was no sound inside. No one wants to take the blame for something like this. He can swear with his conscience that the car accident of the doctor in the temple had nothing to do with him. I don't know who was behind it. He hit someone and ran away. It simply corrupted the social atmosphere. However, that person can be regarded as helping him. Now 3 of the 4 doctors have gone, and only 1 dining department is left. Tang Hui has not yet made specific arrangements. Do you want to take advantage of it first? After killing them all, how to ensure that Tang Hui will target him is really a headache. Department of Food and Beverage. What are you talking about? Mr. Lu was hit by a carriage when he went out in the morning. Mr. Shanbu was stunned when he heard the news. A clerk nodded and said, it should be true. The vice minister has already visited Dr. Liu's home. The doctor of the dining department sat back down in a daze. The doctor of the host and guest department, the etiquette department, and the temple department had troubles one after another within 3 days. If he said it was a coincidence, he would not believe it even to death. Among the 4 departments of the etiquette department, he was the only one left. The doctor was chosen. Although he is still sitting in the yamen well now, he feels weak in his heart. He looked around and frowned suddenly. You, put that kettle away. That cabinet is a little wobbly. Go and pad it up. Who told you to put the scissors here? Take them away. In the study room, Lu Feng, the Minister of Rites, came back from outside, knocked on the door, and walked in. Tang Hui raised his head and asked, what's wrong with Mr. Lu? He was hit in the waist by a carriage. The doctor said he would have to stay at home for at least 100 days, Lu Feng said with some luck. Fortunately, We haven't reported his name yet, otherwise things would be in trouble. Tang Hui pondered for a moment and asked, have you found the carriage that hit him? Lu Feng shook his head and said, I've had someone go check it out, but there's no news yet. He paused and said, the accidents happened one after another to the doctors in the host and guest department, the rights department, and the temple department. This is definitely not an accident. I'm afraid that King Kong didn't want us to have an easy time. There is a 90% chance that the person who injured Mr. Lu is King Kong. Instigated. Tang Hui said, if that's the case, no matter if it's the Shanbu doctor or you, he will follow in the footsteps of those people. Unless we can catch Prince Kong, Lu Feng said with a helpless expression on his face, otherwise, His Majesty will not believe it based on mere speculation. Tang Hui looked out the door and said, the etiquette preparations for the princess wedding cannot be delayed any longer, and the candidate for the wedding messenger must be appointed as soon as possible. But the wedding messenger must have at least a 6th grade official position. Apart from the doctor and the lower official in the dining department, there are no suitable candidates for the etiquette department. Tang Hui looked at him and asked, who said no? Lu Feng was startled, and a bright light suddenly flashed through his mind. He bowed his hands and said in admiration, Your Excellency is wise. The doctor of the Ministry of Rights was in jail, and the doctor of the host and guest and the doctor of the temple were injured. Before the official appointment by the court, the manpower of the Ministry of Rights was obviously not enough. Tang Ning walked around the temple office and visited the host and guest department again. The only remaining minister of the food department is also in charge of the etiquette department. Half an hour ago, Lu Feng, the minister of etiquette, came over personally and asked him to temporarily take over the temple department and the host and guest department. The host and guest department has recently taken on a heavy responsibility and cannot be relaxed. Without the doctor, the affairs within the department are still in order. Tang Ning sat in the chair of the host and guest doctor and flipped through the classics on the table. It has been 3 days, and the minister finally remembered, their etiquette department, and a director who can be pushed out to serve as a messenger. If Tang Hui had realized this earlier, he wouldn't have to waste those medicines, nor would he have to sell his body and dignity in exchange for information. At the same time, in the palace, Tang Ning, Chen Huang held a letter in his hand, looked down and asked, Is this the decision of the Ministry of Rights? The Minister of Etiquette bowed and said, Back to your Majesty, among the 4 departments of the Ministry of Etiquette, the host and guest doctor are seriously ill, the doctor of the Ministry of Rights is under investigation, and the doctor of the temple department was hit by a carriage when he went out this morning. Only Mr. Tang is qualified to be the wedding messenger. Emperor Chen frowned. Although he wanted Tang Ning to go to the Ministry of Rights to gain experience, he had never thought of letting her serve as a wedding envoy to Chu State. He asked, Is there anyone else in your Ministry of Rights? The Minister of Rights continued, Your Majesty, the Minister of the Tang dynasty is knowledgeable and well versed in classics. The post of wedding envoy is related to the reputation of our country, Chen. It cannot be held by officials of the 6th grade or above. Those who are qualified to hold this position and have such abilities will be appointed by the Ministry of Rights. There is no one more suitable than Mr. Tang. Emperor Chen's face showed a thoughtful look. He had no doubt that Tang Ning could serve as the wedding messenger. However, the purpose of the Ministry of Rights should be to drive Tang Ning away from the Ministry of Rights, and even the capital. Although this was against it failed his original intention, but it might not be a good training opportunity for young people who are new to officialdom. Going on a mission to the Chu state is far more difficult than practicing in the 6 divisions, but it is also a rare opportunity. He thought for a moment and said, Announce Tang Ning's entry into the palace. Tang Ning originally thought that the matter would have to wait at least until after the morning court, but she didn't expect that the Ministry of Rights acted very quickly. When he was packing his things and preparing to go to the Yamen, he received the order from the emperor to summon him. In the imperial study room, Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "The Ministry of Rites recommends you as the wedding messenger. Are you willing?" He stood in the hall, cupped his hands and said, "I am willing." Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "As a wedding envoy, I will accompany the princess on a mission to Chu State. It will take at least half a year to come back. Have you thought carefully about it?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Everything is subject to the arrangements of His Majesty and the court." Lu Feng, the Minister of Rites, looked at the scene and stood there, a little confused. He actually admired Lord Shangshi's decision. Lord Shangshi's action removed the thorn in the side of the Ministry of Rites in one fell swoop. If King Kong still wanted to take action, he could just use King Kang's hands to get rid of him. If King Kong died down, he would serve as a wedding presenter. No matter what the result is, they will not suffer any loss. He was already prepared for Tang Ning's strong opposition. When the time came, he would persuade him in front of His Majesty to put the country first and the righteousness first. If he objected again, he would be ignorant of the general situation and might incur consequences. His Majesty's disgust. But who would have thought that he would agree so readily? This made Lu Feng swallow back the words he had spit out in his throat. His face turned blue and white, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. "In this case, I agree with the proposal of the Ministry of Rites." Huang Chen nodded, looked at him and said, "From now on, you will serve as the princess's wedding messenger and be responsible for the preparations for the wedding." After he finished speaking, he thought for a while and continued, "A 6th grade director of the Ministry of Etiquette is still not enough to serve as a wedding messenger. Maybe the Chu State Council will doubt our sincerity." He pondered for a moment and then said, "During the Wei dynasty, the Hanlin Academy was ordered to draw up a decree, and the Hanlin editor Tang Ning was promoted to be a doctor in the Ministry of Rites, and also a bachelor of the Hanlin Academy. He was temporarily appointed as Princess Pinjiang's wedding envoy to prepare for the marriage." This book chapter first release like Have Voice Novel Network. Please remember the URL. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 334. A doctor in the Ministry of Rites and a bachelor's degree student at the Hanlin Academy. In the empty hall, Chen Wang's voice was still echoing. Lu Feng, the Minister of Rites, stood there blankly, with an expression of disbelief. Hanlin Xiaozuan was an official of the 6th rank, and the doctor of the Ministry of Rites and the bachelor of the Hanlin Academy were both from the official position of the 5th rank. Although he was named a doctor of the Ministry of Rites, he was promoted as an exception in order to let him serve as a wedding messenger, but this also means that now, when he comes back from Chu, no matter which department he goes to, his official position will not be lower than the 5th rank. From the time he passed the Jinshi examination to the present, it only took 1 year to be promoted from the virtual position of the 6th grade to the actual position of the 5th grade. If calculated carefully, it was only half a year from the time he joined the Hanlin Academy to the present. You must know that being a new Jinshi requires qualifications, and promotion is particularly difficult. In the past, he was the 2nd Jinshi in the 1st class, and climbed step by step to the position of doctor in the Ministry of Rites. It took him 10 years. It's really sad to think about how things are getting better every 10 years. However, his doctor of the Ministry of Rites is only a temporary substitute. In the past few months, he doesn't know what will happen. For now, he only needs to follow the instructions of the master and send this person away. Changning Palace. A palace maid looked at the female officer in front of her pleadingly and said, "Kui Shang-ai, please let the princess rest. The princess has been practicing for a day." The middle-aged female officer looked at her and said coldly, "If the princess doesn't learn palace etiquette well, she will be ridiculed when she arrives in Chu State. How will the royal family's face be saved by then?" She looked forward at the girl who was biting her lower lip and moving with difficulty, and said, "Your Highness, time is urgent. Someone from the Ministry of Etiquette will come tomorrow. I will have to learn more by then. Could you please practice a few more times?" The girl's ankles had been worn out, but she didn't care. Her eyes were just a little confused. Only when she looked up at the clear blue sky outside the palace, the light would occasionally shine. Tang Hui would eventually think of letting him be the wedding messenger, which Tang Ning expected. As for Chen Huang raising him to 2 ranks and directly letting him take the position of Doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette, Tang Ning did not expect it. According to common sense, when he returns from Chu and returns to the court, it will be a new starting point. He doesn't have any special feelings about the promotion of official rank, but Xiao Ru's rank can now be promoted from the 6th grade Imperial Decree to the 5th grade Imperial Decree, which is another gain. While eating, Chen Yuxian looked at him with some worry and asked, "Your Majesty, how could you think of letting you be the wedding messenger? Chu State is so far away. It will take at least half a year to come and go. If we delay for a while longer, I don't know if I can come back this year." Zhou Mingli put down his chopsticks and said, "This is also a kind of experience for him by your Majesty. Reading thousands of books is not as good as traveling thousands of miles. He went to Chu as a wedding envoy. When he comes back, he will be more knowledgeable." Officials in the DPRK and the central government would not have any objections to his status rising by 2 levels. Otherwise, it would take at least 5 years for him to move from the 6th grade to the 5th grade. Chen Yuxian thought of something and suddenly said, "So, Ninger is now at the 5th level, only half a level lower than you." Zhou Mingli coughed awkwardly, picked up his chopsticks, and continued eating. It took him nearly 20 years to reach his current position from a county magistrate from another state, but Tang Ning's promotion was as casual as eating and drinking. As the father-in-law, he couldn't help but feel a little hot. What made him even more angry was that he was able to sit in the position of Ping'an County Magistrate because of his son-in-law. Whether it was being designated as a wedding messenger or being promoted to 2 levels in a row, it was something worth celebrating. After the family banquet, when Tang Ning returned to the courtyard, she saw Tang Yao Yao sitting on the wall. The time has just entered February, and the afternoon breeze is no longer so cold, with a little warmth that a spring breeze should have. Tang Yao Yao was sitting on the wall in a daze. The setting sun was right behind her. Her hair was ruffled by the breeze and dyed golden by the light coming from behind. "Hello." Tang Ning walked to the yard and shouted to her. Tang Yao Yao swayed, obviously frightened by him, jumped down from the wall, and said angrily, "You are going to die." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Why are you so dazed?" "Spring is here, the cats outside are meowing more cheerfully, and even Tang Yao Yao is different from before." Tang Yao Yao did not answer his question and asked, "Are you going to Chu State?" Tang Ning explained, "This is the court's arrangement, and there is nothing I can do about it." "Xiaoi told me everything." Tang Yao Yao glared at him and said, "You went there for the princess. When a friend is in trouble, you have a duty." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Last time you were forced to get married, I didn't help you find a way. If your father forces you again in the future, and you still come to me, I guarantee that the entire Chen kingdom will not be able to help you. No one dares to marry you. As the saying goes, it would be better to demolish 10 temples than ruin one marriage." Tang Ning felt that she was a bit of a loser, doing things that ruined people's marriages. This time, in addition to sending wedding envoys, according to the arrangement of the court, she also helped Prince Kong propose marriage. "Who is Miss Li?" "She is stunningly talented and beautiful, both civil and military." "Is she worthy of being an idiot like Prince Kong?" "He will talk to her personally about this matter when he arrives in Chu State." Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, "Just because of the princess, don't you want to meet Li Tianlan?" "To be honest, I still want to meet her. After all, I haven't seen her for more than half a year." Tang Ning said sincerely, looked at Tang Yao Yao, and said, of course, I will also go to Chu State this time. I will miss you. Who cares? Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and flew back to her yard on the stone table. Tang Ning looked down and found that there were several cracks on the edge of the stone table. He murmured, just jump over the wall, why use hidden strength? Across the wall, Tang Yao Yao stood in the yard, took out a folded paper from her purse and opened it. There was a sentence on the paper. Just like the phoenix leaving Kinlu, the clouds gathering Wushan. She crumpled the paper into a ball, threw it on the ground fiercely, and said angrily, what a broken sign. She walked to her room angrily, walked halfway, turned back, picked up the paper ball on the ground, smoothed the wrinkles, folded it again, and put it back into her purse. Ministry of Rights. When the officials of the Ministry of Rights arrived at the government office in the morning, they received two pieces of news at the first time. The post of the princess's wedding envoy was held by the new Tang Zushi. In order to make his official position match the identity of the wedding envoy, His Majesty directly promoted him to the position of the Ministry of Rights doctor, and he became the third person in the Ministry of Rights in an instant. Of the three wedding envoys designated by the Ministry of Rights, one fell ill, one was arrested and imprisoned, and another was seriously injured by a carriage at his doorstep. The three words wedding envoy have become synonymous with unlucky stars in the Ministry of Rights. Now that unlucky stars meet unlucky stars, it is unknown what kind of sparks will collide. Many people in the Ministry of Rights are waiting to see. Although Tang Ning is already a doctor in the Ministry of Rights, the affairs of the Ministry of Guests have been busier recently. As soon as he arrived at the Ministry of Rights, the Minister of Guests knocked on the door and walked in, bowing and saying, Sir Tang, the preliminary etiquette regulations have been formulated by the Ministry of Guests. You need to go to the palace to hand over to the female officials of the princess's mansion. If there is anything wrong, we will discuss it again. Tang Ning nodded and said, let it go. Changning Palace. The little maid sat on the bed, shedding tears while applying medicine to Zhao Man. Looking at her rubbed ankles, she said angrily, Your Highness, Kui Shang Ai is too bad. Last time she beat and scolded the maid and was punished by the princess. This time she did it on purpose. Let's tell His Majesty. The girl frowned slightly because of the pain, but still shook her head and said, No, I won't see her again in a few days anyway. The little maid lowered her head, and soon raised it again, saying, Princess, I will accompany you to take a walk outside later, okay? No, I have walked the roads in the palace many times. The girl shook her head, as if she was not interested in anything. Two figures walked in from outside. A female official stood outside the curtain and said, Your Highness, the people from the Ministry of Rights have arrived. It is the doctor of the Ministry of Rights, Mr. Tang, who was selected by His Majesty as the envoy to the marriage. He is here to discuss the etiquette and regulations. Princess. Mr. Tang. Inside the curtain, the girl's spirits lifted slightly, but soon became depressed, and she murmured, The doctor of the Ministry of Rights. She interrupted the female official's words through the curtain, looked at the figure, and said, Let him discuss it with Kui Shang Ai. I'm a little tired. You can go out first. Tang Ning bowed and said, Your Highness, have a good rest. I'll take my leave. Hearing the voice that was so familiar, the girl's body shook, and she jumped off the bed barefoot. When Tang Ning raised her head, she saw a head sticking out from behind the curtain. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 335. How did you come? The girl looked at Tang Ning. Her voice was full of unbelievable surprise and surprise. The indifference that seemed to block the entire world disappeared in an instant. Tang Ning looked at her, cupped her hands, and said, Tang Ning, the doctor in the Ministry of Rights, has met the princess. Zhao Man walked out of the curtain with bare feet and no shoes or socks. She looked at him blankly and asked, are you the wedding messenger? A figure walked in from outside the palace. When he saw her, his expression changed drastically and he said in a sharp voice, how can a princess show her ankles in front of a man? She looked at the two little palace maids and said angrily, why are you still standing there? Why don't you help the princess in quickly? Zhao Man was hurriedly helped in by two palace maids, and then the middle-aged female officer looked at Tang Ning and asked, is this Mr. Tang, the doctor of the Ministry of Rites? Tang Ning nodded. The female officer looked at him and said calmly, I am Shang Yi, who is responsible for teaching the princess etiquette. I would like to ask Mr. Tang to discuss the etiquette and regulations of the princess wedding in detail. Shang Yi is the position of a princess official responsible for teaching royal etiquette to the prince and princess. The etiquette regulations formulated by the Ministry of Etiquette also need to go through the review process of the palace. Tang Ning handed her the etiquette book and waited alone in the side hall. Zhao Man had already put on her shoes and socks, but her steps were a little weird, and she carefully slipped in from outside the hall. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, what's wrong with the princess's feet? A little palace maid next to her pouted and said, it's all Kui Shang Yi who avenges the public and privately, and tortures the princess so much that the princess's feet are worn out. Let's not talk about this anymore. Zhao Man waved her hand, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, when did you become the doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette, and how did you become the wedding messenger? Tang Ning corrected her, I became the wedding messenger first, and then became the doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette. Zhao Man asked, but aren't you in the Ministry of Justice? How come you are in the Ministry of Etiquette? What's going on with the wedding messenger? Tang Ning shook her head and said, it's a long story. I'll explain it slowly when I have time. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhao Man wanted to say something more. Kui Shang Yi walked in from the door and said expressionlessly, Princess, it's time for you to practice your etiquette. Zhao Man looked at her and said, I won't practice today. Kui Shang Yi frowned and said, no, this is. I said I won't practice today. Zhao Man looked at her calmly and said, get out. Kui Shang Yi looked at her in disbelief and opened her lips. Before she could speak, Zhao Man continued, didn't you hear what I said? Kui Shang Yi's face turned blue and white, and after a long time he said, teaching the princess etiquette is something that His Majesty has assigned. I will tell your Majesty everything about today. After saying these words, she walked out with a sullen face. The little palace maid next to Zhao Man looked around and walked to the door. Only Tang Ning and Zhao Man were left in the palace. Tang Ning looked out the door and asked, what's going on with Kui Shang Yi? This is not important. Zhao Man shook his head, looked at him, and said seriously, go and ask father not to let you be the wedding messenger. Tang Ning asked in surprise, why? Because I like you. Tang Ning's expression was stunned. Zhao Man looked at him and said word for word, I swear in my heart, if there is a chance to meet again, I will tell you that I like you. Although you are mean to me, annoying me, and always make me angry, I just like you. I don't know why I like you or why I like a bad person. I like you, so I don't want you to be a wedding messenger, I don't want you to accompany me to Chu State, and I don't want you to see me marry someone else. She looked up at Tang Ning, her eyes already filled with tears. It was the first time that the girl had revealed her heart. Her voice was very soft, but it was as heavy as a stone. In fact, this is the first time Tang Ning has been confessed to like this. Zhao Man and Xiao Ruzii are similar in age, but her image in Tang Ning's mind has always remained that of Princess Ying Ying, who was nothing more than a willful little girl. It's just a girl's movie, how do you know what love is? But when she fell in love with someone at an age when she didn't understand what love was, how could Tang Ning have the heart to let her bear these things alone that she shouldn't have to bear? That's why I want to be the wedding messenger. Tang Ning wiped away the tears on her cheeks and said, because I don't want you to marry the Prince of Chu either. Zhao Man looked at him blankly and murmured, what did you say? Don't worry, I won't let you marry him. Tang Ning tugged at her face and said, it won't be cute if you look like you're crying. Just smile. I'll take care of the rest. Zhao Man was stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses and said hurriedly, don't do anything stupid. I won't do stupid things. Tang Ning shook her head. Only this stupid girl would do stupid things. Her hands were not meant for menial work. She had to carve out an exquisite dice by herself. The scars on her hands are still there to this day. Not good. Zhao Man looked at him and said, I'm very happy if I can see you again. Tang Ning looked at her and said, the princess is still young and doesn't know what real love is yet. You may just like me to play with you, or you may like the stories I write. Maybe in a few years, when the princess knows what true love is, when you like it, you won't like me anymore. Then let's wait until then. Zhao Man smiled and said, at least at this moment, I like you when I stand in front of you. The little maid came over from the door and said, Princess, don't say anything more, otherwise others will doubt. Zhao Man looked at him again and shook her head, I don't want you to take risks for me. Tang Ning looked into her eyes and asked, Princess, do you believe me? Zhao Man looked into his eyes and nodded gently. Tang Ning walked out of the palace and almost bumped into Kui Shang'ai, who was about to come in. Kui Shang'ai looked at him and asked suspiciously, what did the princess say to Lord Tang? Tang Ning had just asked the little maid about Kui Shang'ai. Although she had a high status in the palace, she was just a female official. The reason why she was so harsh on Zhao Man was probably because she thought that the princess was married and it was time to avenge the old grudges before she left. He smiled and said, the princess asked about some rituals. Kui Shang'ai looked at him and said, the princess's marriage is different from getting married. The rituals formulated by the Ministry of Rites need to be revised in some places, which are all marked in the ritual book. Tang Ning nodded and said, I'll take it back and revise it, and come back tomorrow. Kui Shang'ai handed him the ritual book, and looked at the palace with a hint of suspicion. She suddenly frowned and slapped her neck. Looking at the palm of her hand, she found that it was empty. She scratched her neck, walked into the hall, and said, Your Highness, if you don't practice, you won't be able to explain to His Majesty when the time comes. Zhao Man looked at her and said, You go out first, I'll go right away. Thinking that she would have to spend some time talking again, Kui Shang'ai looked at Zhao Man, who was smiling and looked like a completely different person. She was stunned for a while, and then walked out inexplicably. Tang Mansion. Tang Yaoyao held her chin with both hands and stared at a piece of paper on the table in a daze. Xiu'er came over from the side, looked at it curiously, and asked, Miss, what is this? Tang Yaoyao opened her mouth and said listlessly, a fortune. A fortune. Xiu'er immediately became interested, came over to take a look, and asked, Miss, what does the phoenix go to Qinlu, and the clouds gather in Wushan? Tang Yaoyao closed her eyes and said, I don't know. Xiu'er stared at the paper and suddenly said, Miss, I know, the phoenix goes to Qinlu, which means that the beloved is leaving, and the clouds gather in Wushan. Wushan, clouds, does it mean that the beloved is leaving, and if you want to keep him, before he leaves, the two of you go to Wushan together, have sex, and make it a done deal. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 336. Destroying a marriage is a technical job, and destroying a princess's marriage is much more difficult than demolishing 10 temples. Tang Ning didn't want to cause trouble, but in this matter, he had to face the difficulties. He had no choice. Nothing is difficult in this world, as long as there is a willful person. Before he became the wedding messenger, he had already had several backup plans in his mind, leaving a set of guarantees and how to implement them. It's a long way to go to Chu State, and we don't know what will happen along the way. Although the imperial court would definitely send enough guards to escort him, there was no guarantee that there would not be any sudden crisis in a foreign country. The old beggar had to stay to teach Xiao Xiao, so Tang Ning had no choice but to ask him for some secret skills before leaving. These days, although he has many things to be busy with, he has never slacked off in martial arts. With the guidance of the old beggar and the tricks of Tang Yao Yao, even though he is not yet a master, he is far better at facing martial arts than anyone else. Even when he was a human, he might not be without the ability to protect himself. He climbed up the wall and took a look, and saw that the rich man Tang was not in Tang Yao Yao's yard, so he climbed over the wall skillfully and walked to Tang Yao Yao's door. He saw Xiu'er being pushed on the bed by her, lifting up her skirt and spanking her. Wushan Yunyu. Let you talk nonsense. The bigger it is, the less big it is and how small it is. Stop reading those messy books in the future. Tang Ning turned away and coughed loudly before the room became silent. Xiu'er covered her butt and ran quickly from the room to the courtyard, not forgetting to close the courtyard door. Tang Ning walked into the room, looked at Tang Yao Yao, and asked doubtfully, "Xiu'er, what's wrong with you?" "Nothing." Tang Yao Yao was sitting at the table, her face still a little red. Tang Ning was a little surprised by what Xiu'er had just done to make her so angry. Tang Ning poured a glass of water for her, handed it to her, and said, "Drink a glass of water to calm down." Tang Yao Yao picked up the teacup and drank it all in one gulp, then placed the cup heavily on the table and asked, "What do you want from me?" Tang Ning said, "I just learned a few more tricks from the senior, and I want to practice them with you." When looking for someone to spar or teach tricks, if you want to get the maximum effect, it is best to find those whose martial arts are far better than yours, such as Tang Yao Yao and Su Mei, because they can grasp a limit without hurting themselves. Really play the role of feeding. In fact, the old beggar had just given him a medicine that would make the whole body soft after taking it. It only took a small amount to take effect. He did not dare to drink it in Tang Yao Yao's cup, because once he did so, after the effect of the medicine wore off, she will definitely hit him until his whole body becomes soft. In addition to the old beggar, he also wanted to learn something from Su Mei. Tang Ning had never seen her do anything with anyone, but what she knew was magical and always produced unexpected results. "The kung fu of our sect is passed down within the family, not to the outside world." Su Mei dismissed Tang Ning's idea with just one sentence. "Am I an outsider? Are you considered a wife?" Since it was the rule of their sect, Tang Ning didn't have any trouble for her. She shook her head and said, "In a few days, I will be traveling far away and it will take more than half a year to come back." Su Mei glanced at him and asked, "That exquisite dice was given to you by Princess Ping Yang?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked in surprise, "How do you know?" Su Mei curled her lips, "You entered the Ministry of Etiquette and went through so much trouble to become the wedding messenger, wasn't it just for her?" A smart woman can always see the essence at a glance. Tang Ning did not comment and explained, "If a friend is in trouble, if you stand by and watch, you will never feel at ease in your heart for the rest of your life." "Friends?" Su Mei looked at him and asked, "Tell me in your conscience, are you friends, or is her exquisite dice just for fun?" Tang Ning did not argue with her and said, "You also know what kind of person the Crown Prince of Chu is. I can't watch her jump into the fire pit." "So you will jump in with her." Su Mei stretched out her index finger, tapped his forehead heavily, and said angrily, "Is your head filled with water? You kidnapped the princess and destroyed the marriage between the two countries. Do you know how big a crime this is? Once someone finds out, even if you have 10 heads, it won't be enough. I would do the same thing if it were you." Su Mei was stunned and asked, "If I were the one who was forced to marry, would you do this for me?" Meeting. A smile appeared on Su Mei's face, and she stopped mentioning the wedding messenger. She grabbed his wrist and said, "Finally, my love for you is not in vain. Come with me. When you go out, Be careful to protect yourself. My sister will give you a few things. Changning Palace. Zhao Man had already put on her clothes and was walking around the hall. She walked to the door several times, looked outside for a moment, and murmured, "Why aren't you here yet? Princess, princess." A little palace maid ran in from outside and said breathlessly, "Princess, I have already asked about everything you asked me to ask." Zhao Man looked at her and said, "What is going on? Please tell me slowly and in detail." The little palace maid patted her chest, took a breath, and said, "Master Tang himself requested to go to the Ministry of Etiquette. He heard that His Majesty asked him to choose which department to go to, so he chose the Ministry of Etiquette. No one expected it." Zhao Man asked again, "Then, how did he become the doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette, and how did he become the wedding messenger?" The little palace maid shook her head and said, "Master Tang first became the wedding messenger, and then became the doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette." Zhao Man grabbed her hand and said, "What is going on? Please tell me quickly." The maid thought for a moment and said, "The first emissary to the marriage seemed to be the doctor of the host, but he fell ill on the first day he was the emissary, and he was seriously ill. Later, the Ministry of Rights asked the doctor of the Ministry of Rights to be the emissary, but he was arrested and thrown into prison the next day. Then, they chose the doctor of the Ministry of Shrines, and he was hit by a carriage." The maid patted her chest and said with lingering fear, "They all say that the emissary to the marriage is a jinx, whoever is the one will be unlucky. Princess, we have to remind Lord Tang to be careful. It is best to go to the temple to invite a few monks to drive away the evil spirits." Zhao Man's face did not show any worry, but a smile. She threw herself on the bed and rolled around. Her heart seemed to be filled with something warm. The little maid stood in the hall, looked around, and wondered, "Strange, it's already this time, why hasn't Kui Shang'ai come yet?" "Princess, princess, that's great," another little maid ran in from the door and said happily, "Princess, Kui Shang'ai is sick and won't come today." "Sick?" Zhao Man got up from the bed and asked, "How did she get sick?" The little maid smiled and said, "I don't know, anyway, she is very sick. She has been vomiting and diarrhea since last night, and now she can't even get out of bed. This is retribution. Who made her so bad on weekdays?" Zhao Man sat on the bed and thought about it, her eyes gradually curved into crescents. "Kui Shang'ai is sick, and it will probably take 10 days and a half months to get better. Emperor Chen sent a new female official, who will come tomorrow." Tang Ning was playing chess with Zhao Man in the palace. She looked up at him and asked, "You made Kui Shang'ai sick, right?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Who told her to bully you?" She pursed her lips, smiled, and asked, "Will you come tomorrow?" Tang Ning looked at her and smiled, "I will come every day in the future." The rules formulated by the Ministry of Rights need to be agreed with the palace and adjusted according to the actual situation. It cannot be finalized in a day or two. At least, it will take 10 days and half a month to make a final decision. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 337. The officials of the host and guest department went through the classics to formulate etiquette rules for the princess's wedding. They were beaten the first time they were sent to the palace. This is normal. The royal etiquette is very complicated and often needs to be revised several times before being finalized. Officials in the host and guest department are still busy day and night, waiting for something to happen. The position of the wedding envoy for the princess's wedding is tantamount to a terrible curse, and no official in the Ministry of Rights who has a relationship with it will have a good outcome. But several days had passed since Tang Ning was appointed, and nothing happened to him. The collision between the broom star and the curse seems to have decided the winner, and the broom star is undoubtedly better. Many officials in the Ministry of Etiquette began to worry about Mr. Shilang. The broom star was so terrifying that he even suppressed the post of wedding messenger among the 3 doctors. If he waited until he recovered his strength, Lu Shilang might have stepped into the Ministry of Household Affairs, following in the footsteps of the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Justice. Shan Fang. Lu Feng thought for a moment, then raised his head and said, "The 3 ministers of the Host and Guest Department, the Etiquette Department, and the Ancestral Temple Department have been in trouble one after another since they served as the wedding envoys. Tang Ning took over, but everything has been peaceful. It is obvious that this must be the envoy of King Kong's method." The chef from the dining room secretly swallowed a sip of saliva. In the morning, he was still thinking about how Tang Ning had been getting along well these past few days. Is the curse of the wedding messenger a rumor from outside? Is he overthinking it? If it were his turn, it might still be a big deal. Credit. Looking back now, it's a good thing that he didn't take the initiative to ask for help at that time, otherwise, he would have jumped into the fire pit by himself. He pursed his lips and said, "Master Shang, from what I see, Prince Kang's obstruction of the wedding envoy designated by my Ministry of Etiquette this time is probably not just to cause trouble, but may have some other intentions." Lu Feng nodded and said, "I also have the same feeling. If it is just to cause trouble, it will not cause any substantial losses to my Ministry of Rights, and it will not be of any benefit to him. King Kong has many advisors around him, how could he do this without any benefit? Apart from the wedding messenger, he must have some other purposes that we don't know about." Tang Hui stood up and said, "That's because when I go to Chu State this time, the mission of the wedding envoy is not only to deliver the wedding, but also to propose marriage." "Your Majesty means the Princess Changning of the Chu State," Lu Feng suddenly realized and said, "As for the marriage proposal, Your Majesty has always been biased towards King Kong, but since the incident involving the Marquis of Yanping and others, the Minister of Punishment was dismissed, and Lang Zhou was suspended from his post. His Majesty never mentioned this matter again, obviously he was dissatisfied with King Kong. If concubine Hui interceded for King Duan again at this time, things might turn around, but if even the wedding messenger was King Kang's, His Highness Duan Wang's chances are very slim." He looked at Tang Hui and said solemnly, "Sir, we cannot give up this opportunity to Prince Kong." Although she had been appointed as the wedding messenger, officials from the host and guest department were doing most of the work, so Tang Ning herself was very free. In the past few days, he simply didn't even go to the Ministry of Rights, citing the excuse of consulting ancient books in the Hanlin Academy. Xiao Ju sat opposite him, smacked his lips, and asked, "We haven't seen each other for a few days, why did you become the wedding messenger?" Tang Ning said calmly, "This is a proposal from the Ministry of Rights and approved by His Majesty. Are there any questions?" "I always feel that there is something fishy here," Xiao Ju said with a look of doubt on his face. "If you don't want to, His Majesty will not force you to go. I think you are quite happy to be the wedding messenger. It's time for you to take your medicine." Tang Ning ignored Xiao Ju and went to her room to start writing. She had been there for more than half a year, so Tang Renzai naturally needed to save some manuscripts. Today, Tang Renzai is no longer supported by him alone, but also has recruited some best-selling authors, so he does not have to be as tired as before. Xiao Xiao sat next to him and wrote. She hadn't practiced much these days and often stayed by his side quietly like this. In addition to practicing martial arts, Xiao Yi also teaches her reading and literacy. Whether it is martial arts or reading, she learns very quickly, especially the martial arts advancement. Under the guidance of the old beggar, she can be said to have made rapid progress. In the past few months, his physique was slowly improving, and Tang Ning was worried that by the time he came from Chu, he might not be a small opponent anymore. She wrote for a while, then put down the pen, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "Brother." Tang Ning looked at her. She looked at Tang Ning and whispered, "Can I go with you?" Although Tang Ning was reluctant to part with her, going to Chu country was not always smooth sailing. It was not easy to protect him and Princess Jo Quan, and she could not be allowed to take this risk. Tang Ning put down her pen, touched her head, and said, "Brother is going out this time because he has something to do. Xiao Xiao will stay at home with Sister Xiru and Sister Xiaoi, waiting for me to come." Xiao Xiao nodded obediently and said, "I will learn martial arts from my master and protect my sister Xiru and Xiaoi." Xiao Xiao is very obedient and knows etiquette. Tang Ning sometimes wonders if she comes from a wealthy family, but her family members are all dead, so he can't ask further questions. He just wants to wait until she grows up. If you have the opportunity, ask her carefully about her family affairs. Xiao Xiao and Fang Xinyu made an appointment to catch dragonflies by the water. Tang Ning originally wanted to accompany them, but before they could walk out the door, they met the eunuch who came from the palace to deliver the order. Emperor Chen summoned him, probably to prepare for the marriage. When Tang Ning followed the eunuch into the hall, he found that King Kong and King Duan were both there. There was also a person standing beside them, whom he had met once at the Qianglin banquet. King Huai. There was another figure in the hall, standing opposite the three kings. This was a middle-aged man, slightly fat and quite kind. Judging from the court dress he was wearing, he was also a prince. Emperor Chen signaled him to wait aside, looked at the middle-aged man, and asked, "Prince Fu, who do you think is more suitable to marry the Princess Changning of Chu, Ming-er or Cheng-er?" Tang Ning knew that this Prince Fu was the younger brother of Emperor Chen, an idle prince who was entheft outside. The reason why Tang Ning had heard of him was because he was the father of Princess Anyang. After Emperor Chen finished speaking, Prince Duan and Prince Kong looked at Prince Fu at the same time. Prince Fu raised his head, smiled, and said, "Brother, Prince Duan and Prince Kong are both princes of the state of Chen, but this Princess Changning is the daughter of Prince Xian of the state of Chu. In terms of status, it seems that they are not suitable. Prince Xian is almost in charge of the government in the state of Chu. Although his daughter is a princess, it only takes an imperial decree from the king of Chu for a princess to become a princess. Besides, Emperor Chen paused and said, maybe even that imperial decree is not needed." He thought for a moment and looked at Prince Huai again. King Huai looked up at him, stunned for a moment, and said, "Father, I already have a princess. I didn't tell you to marry, I told you to say it." Emperor Chen looked at him, finally waved his hand, and said, "Forget it, you won't get anything out of me. The king of Chu has no princess, and this Princess Changning is a very important person. No matter what, she must marry to our Chen state, but who should she marry?" He looked at the corner of the hall and said, "Tang Ning." Tang Ning was stunned for a moment, and immediately said, "Your Majesty, I am already married. Even if I agree, my two wives will not agree." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 338. Chen Wang's thoughts were very dangerous. He was asked to marry Miss Li out of nowhere, not to mention that Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi would not agree, not even Tang Yao Yao would agree. Square root pineapple square root said. What's more, their relationship hasn't reached that point yet. However, he is the emperor, and the emperor can do whatever he wants without being unreasonable. If he really forces him to do this, he will not be able to resist. What should he do then? This is really a headache. Chen Huang looked at him and swallowed what he was about to say. You guys. He pointed at Prince Huai, Prince Fu, and Tang Ning, waved his hand, and said, if I appoint one person, it would appear that I am partial and unfair, so why not let Princess Changning make her own choice? In ancient times, only the emperor chose a princess to marry at random, but rarely let the princess choose her husband. However, the political marriage between Chen and Chu was originally for exchange, and there was not so much emphasis on it. Emperor Chen summoned him to the palace this time to order this matter. On this mission to the Chu state, he, as the wedding envoy, not only escorted the princess, but also had to shoulder the important task of proposing a marriage. The burden on his shoulders was not light. Regarding the marriage, neither King Kong nor King Duan had any dispute with each other, and they broke up unhappy. Tang Ning and King Huai walked out of the hall together. King Huai turned to look at him and said with a smile, "It's a long way to Chu state. Mr. Tang has a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, so please take care of yourself." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Thank you for your concern, His Highness King Huai." He was not familiar with King Huai, but had only met once. After exchanging pleasantries, he walked down the steps and left. Prince Fu walked out of the palace and stood beside Prince Huai. He looked at Tang Ning's leaving figure with a smile on his face and said, "This champion is also a rare smart person." "What are you talking about, uncle?" Prince Huai put his hands in his sleeves, shrugged and said, "There have only been a few number one scholars in ancient times, but they don't just have to study hard." Prince Fu looked at him with a warm smile on his face, and asked, "It is said that Princess Changning's daughter is a beautiful woman in the country. She is good at literature and martial arts. She is also the daughter of the regent and has a respected status. Don't you plan to fight for it? Spare me." King Huai shook his head resolutely and said, "Not to mention that the two royal brothers can't get through it, I can't explain it to my princess. Uncle Wang, aren't you trying to kill me?" Prince Fu laughed and said, "As a child of the royal family, he is so afraid of his own country. There is not even a concubine in the house except the princess, but he will be laughed at." King Huai looked at him, shook his head and said, "People often say that it takes 50 steps to laugh at 100 steps. How come Uncle Wang laughs at 50 steps? You are not afraid of people's jokes, but do you dare to say what you just said in front of the princess, once?" King Fu was furious when he heard this. "What do you mean? No matter how big or small, where have you learned all the etiquette?" When Tang Ning walked out of the palace, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. The emperor was still as indecisive as ever when encountering major events. However, his indecisiveness this time was exactly what Tang Ning wanted. The power of sending out weddings and proposing marriages was entirely in his hands. Who knows how many gifts King Kong will secretly send after he returns. He originally thought that Emperor Chen's proposal to the Chu state was just to make the relationship between the two countries closer, but the few ambiguous words that Emperor Chen said in the hall today made him understand Emperor Chen's true intention. The situation of the royal family of Chu state was much more complicated than that of Chen state. The Emperor of Chu was about to die soon, and the prince was incompetent and immoral. However, there was a regent in the court who had both political integrity and outstanding ability, and was popular among the people. After the death of the Emperor of Chu, it was not certain who would hold the throne. It would be good if the crown prince of Chu came to the throne. If King Xian came to the throne, then this marriage would be meaningless and would even put Zhao Man in a dangerous situation. But if both marriages are successful, it will not make much difference to the Chen state whether the crown prince of Chu ascends to the throne or King Xian ascends to the throne. No matter what the future holds for Chu state, Chen state will not suffer any loss. This is Chen Wang's wishful thinking. For the benefit of the country, it is possible to sacrifice the happiness and even the life of his own daughter. This is probably the nature of an emperor. Tang Ning didn't plan to tell Zhao Man this, she just wanted to be a silly Badian. He suppressed these thoughts temporarily, passed by the Hanlin Academy, and saw someone walking out of the courtyard. At this time, it was already past the office hours. Unexpectedly, there were still people working overtime in the Hanlin Academy. After taking a closer look, I found that the person who walked out was actually Fang Zhe. Fang Zhe is both a minister of the Ministry of Finance and a bachelor of attendance, so he has two yamen to choose from on weekdays. The same goes for Tang Ning, who is a doctor of the Ministry of Finance and a Bachelor of Attendance. Master Fang, stay here. Tang Ning thought of something and called him out. Fang Zhe turned around, and Tang Ning took out a sachet from her arms and handed it over, saying, Xiao, you forgot this at my house. Master Fang will bring it back for her. Xiao Xiao and Fang Xinyu were originally going to catch dragonflies. They were worried that they would lose the sachet while jumping up and down, so they asked Tang Ning to keep it first. Since they met Fang Zhe, they just asked him to take it back. Fang Zhe took the sachet and asked casually, Your Majesty summoned you. Tang Ning nodded. Fang Zhe put away the sachet and asked, I just saw that King Kong, King Duan, and King Huai passed by. They must have been talking about the proposal to marry Princess Changning of the Chu Kingdom. Did your Majesty leave this job to you? Tang Ning actually didn't want to talk to Fang Zhe. Although he liked Fang Xiaoyu very much, he didn't like her scheming father. Your Majesty trusts you, Fang Zhe said as he walked. However, you took the initiative to ask to join the Ministry of Rites, and worked hard to become a marriage envoy. You traveled thousands of miles from the capital to the state of Chu. You should not only want to marry the princess, right? Tang Ning paused and asked, What does Lord Fang want to say? Fang Zhe stood at the gate of the palace and said, Young man, you still have to know how high the sky is and how deep the earth is, what you can do and what you can't do. Trying to hit a stone with an egg or a tree with an ant will only lead to your own destruction. After he finished speaking, he slowly walked out of the palace. Tang Ning was silent for a moment, and then said, It seems that Lord Fang wasted 14 years in the Hanlin Academy because he knew how high the sky is and what deep the earth is, and what he could do. He accumulated a lot of knowledge and suddenly realized that he could enter the Ministry of Revenue and dominate the court. Fang Zhe stopped, and he remembered something, and clenched his fist tightly in his sleeve. When Tang Ning walked past him, he paused again and asked, If you were given another chance, would you choose to be ignorant of the world, or would you choose to know the pros and cons, know when to advance and retreat, and become the minister of the Ministry of Revenue 14 years later? He left without waiting for Fang Zhe to answer, and disappeared in the crowded street. Fang Zhe stood there for a long time, and then slowly loosened his clenched fists in his sleeves and breathed a long sigh of relief. Tang Ning walked on the street, but his heart was not as relaxed as the previous 2 days. He could hear that Fang Zhe was reminding him that the interests of the two countries were involved, and one carelessness would lead to eternal damnation. Although he was confident, he had to be fully prepared before leaving. He was thinking about something in his mind, and when he passed by a certain place on the street, he suddenly heard a loud noise coming from the shop next to him. He turned his head and saw several shop assistants running out of the street medicine shop in panic. A sturdy man strode out of the pharmacy, holding a little girl in one hand and a butcher knife in the other, and shouted angrily, Quack, give me your life. Looking at the sturdy man, Tang Ning stood on the street, looking stunned. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 339. The big man was about 30 years old. The girl in his arms was pale and the butcher knife in his hand was shining coldly. Mobile phone. In broad daylight, on the streets of the capital, you dare to commit murder. A drugstore clerk led a group of yamen runners and ran over. A constable drew his sword from his waist, pointed at him from a distance, and shouted, Put down your weapons quickly and surrender. The big man looked calm and raised the butcher knife in his hand. You dare to resist arrest? The constable's expression changed and waved his hand and said, Take him down. Wait. Tang Ning walked out of the crowd quickly. The team in the county government of his father-in-law was not enough for Zheng the butcher to cut with a few knives. The constable looked back at him and said in surprise, Sir, this. Put away your weapons. Tang Ning walked forward, looked at the girl in Zheng the butcher's arms, and asked, What's wrong with Nanan? Tang Mansion. Tang Ning called the imperial physician Ling Yuheng and the imperial physician Chen. The imperial physician Chen took his fingers away from the girl's wrist, stroked his beard, and said, "If it's a few days later, even the gods can't save her." Tang Ning took out a small box from the cabinet and said, "I still have a Dahuan Dan here. I wonder if it can be used." The imperial physician Chen took the box and looked at it, and exclaimed, "I heard that Sun's Dahuan Dan is a magical medicine that can take away the fortune of heaven and earth, but the whereabouts of the divine Dr. Sun are elusive and it is rare to see it. I didn't expect that Lord Tang would have one here." After saying that, he handed it back to Tang Ning and said, "She is weak and cannot be supplemented. This Dahuan Dan will do her more harm than good. Lord Tang should put it away. I will prescribe some milder medicine for this little girl and let her recover slowly." After Ling Yuheng and the imperial physician Chen left, Fang Xinyu and Tang Yaoyao came over. In Lingzhou, when Zheng the butcher was busy, the little girl named Nanan often hung around them. Tang Ning looked at Butcher Zheng and asked, "Why are you here, senior?" "Half a month ago, my daughter fell ill and the doctors in Lingzhou couldn't cure her. I thought there were many great doctors in the capital, so I closed my shop and brought her to the capital for treatment. Don't call me senior, just call me old Zheng." Butcher Zheng threw a large bag on the ground. Tang Ning only heard a series of ping-pong sounds, and the bag fell apart, revealing a pile of gold, silver, and jewelry. Tang Ning looked at the things on the ground and said in surprise, "This is..." Butcher Zheng waved his hand and said, "On the way here, I took down a few bandit dens to make up for the medicine." The bandits on the way from Lingzhou to the capital were also unlucky to encounter such an unreasonable person. Now Tang Ning has a clear understanding of the strength of the warriors in this world, and is more aware of the power of Butcher Zheng's knife at that time. If we use the three mountains he has not yet climbed as an analogy, the gap between Tang Yaoyao and Zheng the butcher is still several Sumei and Li Tianlan behind. Zheng the butcher looked at him and said, "Thanks to you this time." Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "It's just a small effort. Besides, Nanan has called me brother several times. Of course, I can't just leave her alone. No matter how good your martial arts skills are, you can't do anything about things like birth, aging, illness and death. In contrast, the old beggar is a good role model. Not only is he a martial arts expert, he also knows fortune-telling, witchcraft and poison. Judging from the medicinal diet and bath he prepared for Xiao Xiao, he probably has a deep attainment in medicine. It's true that having many skills is always a burden. He can be said to be a walking encyclopedia." "Hey, butcher, when did you come?" As soon as Tang Ning finished speaking, he poked his head out of the door, looked at Zheng the butcher, and said in surprise, "Come and drink with me." Tang Yaoyao and Zairu were in the room with Nanan, the old beggar and Zheng the butcher were squatting in the yard drinking and eating meat. Tang Ning sat in the pavilion and continued to think about what happened just now. Fang Xiaopang's father reminded him that for this risky thing, no matter how much preparation is done, it is not too much. Now there is only 1 month left before the departure, he should make some preparations early. Xiao Xiao stood in the yard, watching Tang Ning in deep thought. After thinking for a while, she walked to the corner, looked at the old beggar, and whispered, "Master." The old beggar looked at her and immediately smiled. He pointed at her and introduced her to Zheng the butcher, "This is my new disciple." "How is she?" Zheng the butcher looked at her and nodded, "Not bad." "What do you mean not bad?" The old beggar frowned and said, "My disciple has a good physique and is rare in 100 years. In 10 years at most, he can surpass you. In another 20 years, it is not a problem to surpass me." Xiao Xiao looked at him and whispered, "Master, I have something to say to you." The old beggar looked at her, then looked at Zheng the butcher, kicked him away, and said, "Didn't you hear what my disciple said? Do you want to tell me? Stay away." After that, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Xiao Xiao, saying, "My dear disciple, what's the matter, tell me." Xiao Xiao clenched his sleeves and said, "Brother will go out this time, and he will go very far and come back for a long time. I don't know what kind of danger he will encounter. I want master to protect brother. That kid is as smart as a ghost. How could he let himself get into danger? The old beggar frowned and said, I am still thinking about teaching you martial arts next. Xiao Xiao clenched his fists and said, but brother will be gone for so long. What if he encounters bad guys? I want to go with brother. Okay, okay. The old beggar hurriedly said, you stay at home, master will go. He sighed and said, what's so good about that boy? Why is my good disciple so nice to him? In the pavilion, Tang Ning looked at the old beggar and asked in surprise, you want to go with me? What do you think I want? The old beggar glanced at him and said, if I don't go, what if my good disciple no longer wants to be my disciple? Where can I find such a good seedling? No, Tang Ning refused without thinking. Although if the old beggar goes with him, he can avoid a lot of worries and his safety is guaranteed, but what about at home? The Tang family and Prince Duan were eyeing the capital. Tang Ning had been away for at least half a year. How could he rest assured that Xiru and Xiao Ai would live in the capital without any guarantee? With the old beggar at home guarding the rear, he could leave with peace of mind. Apart from him, he wouldn't be at ease with anyone else, so Tang Ning didn't think of letting him go with her at first. If I don't go, with your skills as a three-legged cat, if something happens outside, how can I explain to my good disciple? The old beggar frowned and said, where can I go at this moment? I'll find you a satisfactory bodyguard. Your Chen country has a few powerful sect leaders with decent martial arts skills. It's okay to capture them, but the distance is too far. He glanced away inadvertently and saw Butcher Zheng picking up his wine gourd and drinking heavily. Seeing that the bottle of wine in the gourd was almost gone, his expression changed, his body flashed, and he had appeared in the courtyard, shouting, shut up. The old beggar snatched the gourd from Butcher Zheng's hand, and the mouth of the gourd was downwards. Only the last drop of clear wine fell to the ground. He took a deep breath, smiled, and said, Pig Butcher, have you ever heard the story of the knotted grass? Butcher Zheng shook his head and said, no. The old beggar was startled and asked, how about reciprocating a favor? No. Have you ever heard of a meal worth 1,000 pieces of gold? Nor. The old beggar looked at him and said angrily, have you ever read a book? Butcher Zheng shook his head, no. The old beggar took a deep breath and said, a drop of kindness should be repaid by a spring. You must have heard this, right? I heard it. Butcher Zheng finally nodded. The old beggar breathed a sigh of relief and said, you see, we Jianghu people, walking in the Jianghu, only rely on the word righteousness to repay kindness and revenge. Even if it is a drop of kindness, we should repay it with a spring. Butcher Zheng looked at him and asked, what do you want to say? Look, if it hadn't been for Mr. Tang, your precious daughter would have been lost. This can be regarded as a gift of survival. You must repay this kindness. The old beggar smacked his lips and said, the lamb knelt down to breastfeed, the black magpie fed back, even the beast. We all know how to repay kindness, but now that Mr. Tang is in trouble, if you don't help, wouldn't you be worse than a beast? Butcher Zheng looked at him and said, the lamb kneels down to its mother, and the bird feeds back to its mother. Your illusion is wrong. The old beggar said angrily, I am discussing the use of illusions with you, right? But your illusion is wrong. Have you never read the book? You can't lie to me even if I haven't read the book. Snapped. The old beggar threw the wine gourd to the ground, looked at Butcher Zheng, and said viciously, you just drank all my wine, can you tell me how to settle this account? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 340. Tang Ning looked at Zheng the butcher and asked in surprise, "You want to go to Chu with me?" One of the things that worried him the most was that he would not have a decent master to protect him when he went to Chu. Although the marriage was a major matter and there would be many guards accompanying him, he still needed a reliable bodyguard when encountering special circumstances. Zheng the butcher was not as powerful as the old beggar, but with a butcher knife on his waist, he was definitely qualified for this position. But the question was, why did he do this? Just because he saved Nanan? Although this reason made sense, it obviously did not convince Tang Ning. Zheng the butcher explained, "I have some things to do in Chu this time. It happened that I was going the same way as you. During this time, I will ask you to take care of Nanan." Although he didn't know what he had to do in Chu, Tang Ning was relieved of most of his worries by having such a master accompany him, so he naturally would not refuse. The little girl had been ill for a long time and was weak. Tang Ning arranged for them to stay in the mansion first. There was still nearly a month before the departure. By then, Nanan should have recovered enough, and Zheng the butcher could leave without worry. During this time, he still had a lot of things to arrange. The palace set a time limit. Within 5 days, the Ministry of Rites must set all the rules. Although it was a little different from what Tang Ning expected, the new female official in Changning Palace was easy to talk to. As a marriage envoy, he would not be stopped from entering and leaving Changning Palace during this period, even if there was no suitable reason. In Changning Palace, Zhao Man looked at him expectantly and asked, "When are we leaving?" In the past, she was obviously unhappy because of the marriage, and she was almost depressed. Since Tang Ning served as the marriage envoy, she actually looked forward to it. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Isn't it good in the palace? Why are you in such a hurry to leave? You will be tired from the journey and it will not be as relaxing as it is now." Zhao Man held her chin with both hands and said, "After leaving, I can be with you all the time. It would be great if I could walk on the road for a lifetime." The little girl thought about things so naively. Tang Ning didn't want to delay on the road for a lifetime. He still had a lot of things to do in his life. After accompanying her in Changning Palace for a while, Tang Ning walked out of the palace. He did not go home, but came to the north district of the capital accompanied by Zheng the butcher. Most of the people living in the north district were poor. It was the poorest and most chaotic place in the capital. Tang Ning bought a large piece of land here at a very cheap price and built many houses. This is the location of the headquarters of the beggar gang in the capital. Near the capital, I dare not say that 100%, but nearly 90% of the beggars were recruited by Lu Laoer. In addition to begging, they also worked as shop assistants and collected information. When Tang Ning walked into the yard, someone came forward to report. Lu Laoer walked out of the house quickly and said hurriedly, "The leader has arrived. Do you have any instructions?" The beggars sect here is not like the legendary beggars sect, which is the largest sect in the world and has strong strength. No one dares to provoke it, but fortunately they have many people, special professions, and are not conspicuous. They can often do things that others cannot do. Tang Ning needs Lu Laoer to arrange some people to keep an eye on the Tang family and the dignitaries he has dealt with, to prevent them from doing something out of line in a moment of heat. Lu Laoer nodded and said, "Don't worry, leader, I will definitely get this done." He thought for a while, looked at Tang Ning again, and said, "The journey is long, do you want to bring some brothers with you to take care of you?" Tang Ning nodded. As a wedding envoy, he can bring 20 followers, and he also needs some people of his own along the way. Lu Laoer looked aside and told a disciple, "Pick out 20 core disciples and wait for the leader's orders along the way." The core disciples of the beggars sect can do more than just beg for food. The old beggar taught them some formations and basic martial arts. After more than a year, these disciples have some skills. They may not be able to fight alone, but if 10 or 20 of them gather together, it will be difficult for ordinary martial arts masters to escape. After arranging the affairs of the beggars' sect, Tang Ning went to Tianrunju again. He pushed open Su Mei's courtyard door and saw Tang Shui sitting at the stone table in the courtyard. In order not to attract attention, he made an appointment with Princess Anyang through Zhao Man, and then made an appointment with her in a roundabout way through Princess Anyang. What Tang Ning was most worried about was that after he left, the Tang family would do something small. It was not enough to have Lu Lao send people to watch them. If Tang Shui could be captured or dealt with, it would be like having double insurance. Tang Ning walked up to her and said, "I will be the envoy to the marriage this time, and will accompany the princess to the state of Chu." Tang Shui nodded and said, "I know. It may take a long time to come back this time." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "If the Tang family makes any moves after I leave, can you, cousin, come here to tell Miss Su?" He would not make it difficult for her to deal with the Tang family. Just passing the message to Su Mei would be enough for her to make some preparations in advance. "Okay," Tang Shui answered very straightforwardly. "Thank you, cousin." "You're welcome. I'm in the capital, you don't have to worry. You have to be careful when you are outside." Su Mei walked out of the room. Tang Shui glanced at her and said to Tang Ning, "I'll go talk to my aunt. Because she has to come here often, she is no longer as tit-for-tat with Su Mei as before, but the two of them are not friends. Maybe it is a certain nature of women. Whether it is Tang Shui, Tang Yaoyao, or Zhao Man, they are not as good as each other. Su Mei, who is among the top women in terms of figure, appearance, and temperament, has a natural resistance." Su Mei sat on the swing, swaying from time to time, and sighed, saying, "I won't be able to sleep well for at least half a year again." Her sleep is actually much better than at the beginning. She can fall asleep holding a doll, but it is just that it is difficult to enter a deep sleep. Tang Ning looked at her and suggested, "I recently prepared a medicine that can make people sleep for several hours. It may cause dizziness and nausea as side effects. Do you want to try it?" "Forget it." Su Mei looked at him as if he was that kind of medicine, so Tang Ning had no choice but to give up that thought. Su Mei sighed leisurely and then said, "Put away the things I gave you and use them for self-protection in critical moments. Your trip to Chu country this time did not go as smoothly as you imagined. Regardless of the situation along the way. Not to mention the countless green forest bandits, you may also encounter considerable resistance after arriving in Chu state. No matter what happens, you must remember that saving your life is important." When she first came here, Tang Ning was still desperately thinking about returning to her original world. Now, these thoughts have gradually faded away. Rather than being a loner without family or friends in another world, he prefers this place with family and friends. Whether it was Tang Shui or Su Mei, this feeling of being truly cared for by someone was something he could not experience in another world. "You must take care of yourself." Su Mei looked at him and warned seriously, "If something happens to you, where can I find such good medicine?" Tang Ning's hard-won emotion was interrupted by her. She was worried that Lao Zheng had been waiting outside for a long time. When Tang Shui came out of the backyard, he went out with her. Su Mei sent them out of the courtyard. When the three of them walked out, Butcher Zheng, who was leaning on a tree by the lake, clapped his hands and walked over. At a certain moment, Tang Shui and Su Mei's expressions suddenly changed, and their expressions became extremely nervous. "You go first." Seeing the person in front of him striding forward, Su Mei and Tang Shui appeared in front of him on the left and right, and said in unison. Butcher Zheng continued to walk towards the side, feeling the pressure coming from the front. Su Mei gently touched her hand on her waist, and a soft sword appeared in her hand. "Take him away." Su Mei glanced at Tang Shui, and then looked intently at Butcher Zheng who was walking over. "Be careful." Tang Shui glanced at Su Mei, grabbed Tang Ning's wrist, and whispered, "Let's go." "What are you doing?" Tang Ning looked at them in surprise and said, "Don't be nervous, we are on our own." Butcher Zheng walked over, looked at Su Mei, then at Tang Shui, and finally at Tang Ning, and said, "These two girls are pretty good." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 341. These two girls are certainly good. One is his adopted cousin and the other is his adopted sister. Although they are not his relatives, they can be relied on at critical moments. Please search on Baidu. After a misunderstanding, Tang Ning explained clearly. Su Mei pulled him aside and asked, "Where did you recruit such a master?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Is he very tall?" Su Mei said solemnly, "Very tall." "How tall?" "Tang Shui and I are not his opponents." Su Mei looked at Zheng the butcher on the side and said, "He has a lot of evil spirits and can't hide it. Such a person must have stained countless lives with his hands. I thought he was going to harm you. Old Zheng has been killing pigs all his life. It is impossible for him not to have evil spirits. He also has countless lives on his hands, but they are not human lives, but pig lives." Tang Ning looked at Su Mei and asked, "You want me to leave even though I can't beat him?" Su Mei rolled her eyes at him, "Nonsense, you're my brother, who should I save if I don't save you?" Yang Guifei turned around and smiled, and all the beauties in the palace were pale in comparison. Su Huli's rolling eyes were also very charming, making people excited. Tang Ning looked at Zheng the butcher and explained, "Old Zheng was our neighbor in Lingzhou before. He was a pig butcher. This time he is going to chew with me." Su Mei was obviously relieved and said, "Having him by your side is enough to deal with most accidents. However, are you sure he won't harm you?" "He saved my life before." Tang Ning smiled and said, "If he wanted to do it, he would have done it long ago." "That makes me feel relieved." Su Mei looked at him and said, "You go, I will take good care of your mother. You won't leave until the beginning of next month." "I'll talk about this later." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "I will come to accompany you more often before I leave." Su Mei looked at him and said with satisfaction, "You have a conscience." Tang Ning said goodbye to Tang Shui at the door of Tianrunju, and then went back with old Zheng. In the courtyard, Su Mei put down the soft sword in her hand, and her palms were full of sweat. An old woman came over from the backyard, looked at the soft sword she placed on the table, and asked in surprise, "What's wrong, did you meet a strong enemy?" "It's a misunderstanding." Su Mei shook her head and murmured, "How could a butcher have such a heavy evil spirit?" The old woman frowned and said, "What butcher?" After a while, after listening to her description, the old woman frowned and said, "Even if he kills pigs all his life, he won't let you see his hair stand on end. This man is definitely a butcher who has killed people from a sea of blood and corpses. Otherwise, a master like him would have been able to restrain his aura long ago. How could he be detected so easily by you?" She looked at Su Mei and said, "The world is big, and the place you are standing now is still far from the top. Don't underestimate the people in the world." Su Mei said that Zheng the butcher had a heavy evil spirit, but Tang Ning didn't notice anything. Instead, he felt that he was quite kind. It was just because of his burly figure that he stood there, which also gave people a sense of oppression. When they got home, Qing told him that Xiaoju had been waiting in the hall for a long time. Tang Ning stepped in and found several large boxes in the hall. He opened one and saw all kinds of gold, silver, and jewelry piled together. He looked at Xiaoju and asked in surprise, "What do you mean?" Xiaoju said, "A gift for you. Do you have something to ask me? If you have something to say, just say it directly. Do we need these between us? You are too polite." Tang Ning looked at him, waved his hand and said, "Qing quickly have someone carry these things to the warehouse." "This is a gift from King Kong." Xiaoju said, "I just sent it for him." Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Why did King Kong send me these for no reason?" Xiaoju shrugged, "I'll ask you. King Kong was a miser. The gifts he sent this time were much more valuable than before. Of course, it was impossible to send him a New Year gift 10 months in advance. This time, in addition to sending a marriage, he also had the important task of seeking marriage. King Kong and Prince Duan argued fiercely about this matter in the hall, which showed that they were determined to win. Sending people to send gifts directly was obviously bribery. King Kong was not stupid enough to do so. It was not uncommon for Xiao Ju to send gifts to him in a roundabout way. As a marriage envoy, he was responsible for all matters of this trip, and he also negotiated with the Chu government. There was a lot of room for secret operations. But whether it was King Kong or Prince Duan, there was no chance. Miss Li was not at the same level as them. However, these gifts had to be accepted, and it was not easy to move them back and forth. Your Majesty actually let Lu Tang serve as the deputy envoy for the wedding. Xiao Ju raised his head and took a sip of tea, and said indignantly, that guy is stubborn and straightforward. Can he take on such an important task? This time, in addition to Tang Ning, the envoy for the wedding, there are two deputy envoys to the state of Chu. One of them is Lu Tang, the son of the Minister of War, who has a little feud with Tang Ning. To be more precise, Tang Ning and him have a little feud. Last year, he was beaten up by Tang Shui and kicked away by Tang Yao Yao. For a long time, he was the laughing stock of the capital. Lu Tang is a military officer. This time he served as the deputy envoy for the wedding, commanding 800 guards and responsible for the safety of this trip. There is another deputy envoy, who seems to be an official of the Honglu Temple. Tang Ning is not very familiar with him. In addition, there is an accompanying delegation, probably less than 10 people. Xiao Ju's tone was a little sour. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Do you want to go?" "What's the point of patrolling the palace all day?" Xiao Ju said with some regret. "Finally, I had the opportunity to leave the capital, but that kid Lu Tang beat me to it." Tang Ning was quite satisfied with Huang Chen's arrangement. He was really unsure about entrusting the safety of so many people to Xiao Ju. "I don't care, but you are different." Xiao Ju suddenly looked at him and said, "The two deputy envoys this time, one is Lu Tang, who has a grudge against you, and the other is Honglu Si Chang. You are a Duan Wang person, so you have to be more careful along the way." Although Tang Ning had not had many interactions with Lu Tang, he was a stubborn person who did not hold grudges. The first time he was kicked away by Tang Yao Yao, he actually came to apologize. Tang Ning was not worried about what he would do on the road. What hands and feet? On the other hand, Tang Ning is not very familiar with the Honglu Temple Prime Minister. Since he is a member of King Duan, he will probably cause trouble for him. If he is really too annoying, let old Zheng arrange it for him. It will be dangerous all the way. With so many, it is very possible for the deputy envoy to be sent back due to diarrhea, broken legs, drug coma and other reasons. A sneeze. A sneeze. A sneeze. In a private room of a restaurant somewhere in Beijing, a young man covered his mouth and sneezed several times. Lu Feng put down his wine glass, looked at him, and asked, "Master He, are you feeling unwell?" The young man rubbed his nose and said, "It's okay, maybe it's because I wore too thin clothes today." Lu Feng looked at him and said in surprise, "The weather has been good recently, and Mr. He's clothes are not too thin." Someone next to the young man said, "It's a long way to go to Chu State. The journey is tiring. Mr. He has a heavy responsibility. Please take care of yourself and don't fall ill before setting off." The young man nodded and said, "I will go back and add another piece of clothing." "Don't worry, my lords, I will not delay His Royal Highness Duan Wang's important event." Lu Feng nodded and added, "Most of the envoys accompanying this time are our people, but you still have to be careful about Tang Ning, the wedding messenger. If my prediction is correct, he will definitely be biased when it comes to proposing for marriage. Prince Kong, Lord He, you must try to win over Deputy Envoy Lu along the way. As for Tang Ning, if possible." He looked at the young man, did not speak again, and just made a slight gesture. The young man looked at him, nodded solemnly, and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Liu, this trip is very dangerous, and anything can happen."